Alright shredders, let's have a look at how to set up your bike perfectly for you. You're going to need some Allen keys, a shock pump. You might also need a T25 Torx wrench. Alright, first of all let's have a look at saddle height. So a really good guide for setting up saddle height is to pop that pedal crank down to the 6 o'clock position down here, and then put your foot on that, but put your heel on the pedal, and you're looking for your knee to be lightly flexed, and that should give you a rough ballpark position to start from with your saddle. Then once you go riding, if it's a little bit low or a little bit too high, you can adjust. If your hips are rocking, your saddle's definitely too high. Handlebars. So many bikes come with 800mm wide bars like these. That's so you can cut them down to your preferred width. So you can see with mine, I've trimmed my bars down a bit to my preferred width of 750 because I find anything wider stresses my shoulders. So that's something to think about. Just find out what you feel comfortable with. Let's have a look at brake levers. There's quite a lot we can do with the brake levers to make sure that you're safe and comfortable. So let's get into it. So what we're trying to do with brake lever setup is to make it as easy as possible for your fingers to reach the lever so that you don't get hand fatigue. So first of all, let's look at the position of the lever in this plane laterally. So this is a good hand position. I've got my hand just by the edge of the grip at the end. And so we want to get this brake set up so that it ends up with my hand sitting in this position. If you've got your brake lever too far in, it's going to pull your hand too far in with it. You've got all this gap here. If you have it too far out, it's going to push it out, and I've actually got my hand overhanging, and that's actually going to get quite sore as I ride. So you want to have the brake lever in a place where when I've got my finger on the lever, it just sits nicely like that. If you currently brake with 2 fingers, I'd strongly recommend teaching yourself to brake with 1 finger because that gives you much better grip on the handlebars, and you're a lot less likely to get your hand knocked off by an unexpected hole or obstacle. If you want to find out more about good braking technique, you can check out this video right here. So we've got the lateral position sorted. Now let's have a look at lever angle, which is this angle here. So a good rule of thumb with this lever angle is to stand up on your bike and have your arm in line with your finger, and that's going to give you approximately the right angle. Just be careful not to have your lever too low like this, because what that means is you're going to be reaching right over the handlebar, and that's actually going to cause you some fatigue in here. So if you use that straight arm as your start point, and then from there you can adjust to your preference. Finally, let's look at this distance here. This is called lever reach. You want it to be easy for your finger to reach. Now for me that's not easy. I'm really using this tiny last portion of my finger, which to me is the weakest part. So I'm going to use this adjuster here to wind that in so that I can really wrap my finger right round, and then when I pull on the lever I'm using the stronger part of my finger, and that's going to reduce hand fatigue. So you might have an adjuster here like what I've got where I can just use my fingers to turn it, or you might need to use an Allen key on something in here which is going to adjust, and it will be a small Allen key, a bit like this one. If you want to delve more deeply into cockpit setup, you can check out this video up here. Right, let's get the suspension set up. So first of all, a quick jargon buster. We're going to be talking about sag, and that's how much the suspension compresses just by being sat on the bike. We're going to talk about compression damping, and that's how quickly the fork compresses when it hits an obstacle. And we're going to talk about rebound damping, and that's how quickly the fork or the shock rebounds, returns to that start position after it's hit an obstacle. You should always start by setting up the sag. So let's sort out these front forks first. So we're going to need to check the air pressure on the left hand side of the fork, marked by the top cap which says air on it. There's normally a sticker on the fork leg here which tells you how much air to put in for your weight. So for me, 55 to 65 psi. So let's check and see what we've got in there. So just screw this on here until it comes to a stop. So it says it's got 70 psi in it. We wanted 55 to 65. So there's a button, normally a button just here to let a bit of air out. Take that off. Okay, so this is where the wall comes in. I'm going to lean against it. Just stand up on my bike in a normal position. This is just to get the weight of my body onto the bike. Now you should do this with your helmet on, knee pads, backpack, whatever you normally ride with. And then push the O-ring down, and then carefully get off the bike. So on this RockShox fork, there is a nice gauge to help you figure out what percentage you're at, and we're sitting at about 26%, which for an enduro or trail bike is absolutely perfect. For a downhill bike, you might be looking at 30 to 33%, and for a cross-country bike, maybe you might bring it down to 20%, but it is down to personal preference. So that's great. My sag is set correctly for my forks. You may find that you need to go back and check the air pressure again if you haven't got the percentage that you're looking for. So the next thing to set up is the rebound. That's normally denoted by a red knob or a knob with some red on it. And on a RockShox fork, you have a really handy little dial with a tortoise and a hare, so you can tell which direction does what. So the hare makes the rebound faster and the tortoise slower, obviously. The rebound controls how quickly the fork rebounds after it's been compressed. So when it gets compressed, and then how quickly it comes back up. So what you don't want is for your bike to be like a pogo stick, so it goes bang, 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 bang. It's going to be really uncontrollable. And conversely, you don't want it to be too slow. The problem with the rebound being too slow is that when you hit something, the fork doesn't extend fast enough to be ready for the next hit. And over time, that's going to reduce the amount of travel you've got available because the fork has packed down. A good start point for finding the correct rebound setting is if you push down on the fork, you want the handlebars to come up with your hands, but not too forcefully and also not too slow. So I like to push down and then loosen my grip, and hopefully it all comes up together, and that's going to feel about right. So let's see that in action. So when my hands get back up to the top, the bars are there with them. This is what it's like when the rebound is too fast. So fast it pushes my hands up. You can really feel it if you try that on your own bike. It really pushes right back up into my hands, and if that happened on the trail, that's actually going to contribute to any arm pump or hand fatigue that I might get. Final thing to set up is compression, which is designated by a blue knob on the right hand fork leg. So compression controls how easy it is for the fork to be compressed. But a lot of forks come with this useful 3-position dial, so you've got open, pedal and firm on this fork. So open generally we'd use for descending, that's going to be at its softest. Pedal, perhaps just for riding along an undulating trail. And then firm, that's going to make it quite hard, and that's really good for climbing. You might have an additional compression adjuster in the middle of the fork here. And in very simple terms, if you turn it to the plus, it's going to make the fork harder to compress, and if you turn it to the minus, it's going to make it easier or softer to compress. But I don't want to go too deep into suspension settings in this video, so if you want to delve deeper into that, then have a look at the manufacturer's recommendations. And then if you've got rear suspension, the exact same principles apply. So we start off by checking the air pressure, check the sag, in the same way that we did with the fork. So you lean up against a wall, bounce on the bike a bit, and then push your O-ring down, climb off carefully, and then check how much sag you've got, and that's going to give you an indication of whether or not you need more or less air. Obviously you've got a red dial or knob adjuster for the rebound, and then you'll probably have something for compression like the forks. Typically these days you're going to have something that is fully open for descending, fully closed for climbing, and then a middle position. Don't forget to check your tyre pressures. You're looking for a pressure which gives you a good balance between grip and puncture resistance. If you just pump your tyres up really hard, you're not really going to have any grip, and you're going to be skittering around all over the place on the trail, which is not going to be very nice. And conversely, obviously, if they're too soft, you're just going to get puncture after puncture. So do a bit of experimentation with that. As a guide, I weigh 65 kilos and I run about 23 psi in the back and 22, 21 in the front, and that's out here in the Alps. That gives me a good balance of grip versus puncture resistance. So there you go, there are some tips to help you get your bike set up and ready to go. Hope you found them helpful. As always, if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below. If you'd like to see a video, a more in-depth one about suspension settings, let me know. And otherwise, it just remains to say thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.